Feel uncomfortable, go ahead and take the coat off and be comfortable. There will be a public questions and comments portion available at today's meeting to last up to 15 minutes. Total 3 minutes per speaker. Are there any persons who wish to speak today, Madam Secretary?
No speakers.
So the Board of Trustee meeting schedule is on the agenda for the vote during tomorrow's meeting. Is there any discussion about any changes that needed to be to the item? I think that was sent out by Paula. Anybody have any questions or changes? I think it's been Ed Curtis has signed off on. Is that correct? Okay, the next item is the Ohio Valley Conference certification for SIU Edwardsville, which is presented to the board annually and signed by the chair. A copy of this form has been sent to board members ahead of the meeting. Are there any questions about this item? Seeing none, I will sign the form, which I think I've already signed, and it will be sent to the Ohio Valley Conference. The next item is a presentation on the SIU High School Upward Bound Program. Dr. Kupchak, will you introduce our speakers?
Thank you, Chair Gilbert. Back here. I'm pleased to welcome and introduce Dr. Timothy Staples, who is here to share with you information about SIU's High School Upward Bound Program. He will also introduce his other presenters. Dr. Staples serves as the Executive Director of the SIU East St. Louis Center. In this role, Dr. Staples provides strategic leadership and supervision for various federal and state grant programs serving children, youth, and families in the East St. Louis and surrounding areas. Additionally, he's an adjunct assistant professor for education leadership and teaches in the University Honors Program. Dr. Staples has over 20 years of experience in education, both pre-K to 12 and higher education. Prior to coming to SIU, he served as the director of the campus life for the South Carolina Governor's School for Mathematics and Science. Dr. Staples also had served in residence life and student affairs administrative roles at American University, Miami University of Ohio, and Illinois State University. He earned a doctorate of education and a Master of Science in Arts and Education Leadership from Aurora University, Illinois. Dr. Staples also earned the best degree he got, a Bachelor of Science in History from the Southern Illinois University, Edwardsville. Dr. Staples, the floor is yours.
Thank you, thank you. It was the best degree I have. I actually started it at Carbon. So we all family. Welcome, it's so good to see all of you. It's my pleasure to introduce my team for this presentation. Next slide. The transformative power at SIU is truly something that resonates with me as well. These programs here in East St. Louis started in the 50s, the first iteration of the federal programs. Today, we're going to talk about our Upward Bound program and our collaboration with faculty, staff on the Edwardsville campus. There are several famous individuals that you may have heard of: Oprah Winfrey, Viola Davis, Patrick Ewing, but some least famous. I would not say I'm famous. I am a product of Upward Bound. If it wasn't for SIUE's Upward Bound program, not very sure that I would have went to college. I'm a first generation student, and while I was in high school, SIUE bused me from Lincoln Senior High School and brought me over to the Broadway building where I took science, math, and English from SIUE faculty. So it is my pleasure at this point to present one of our Upward Bound directors, Mr. Cooper, to introduce our next speaker.
I was waiting for applause for this one. So thank you for being here today. My name is Mr. Cooper. I'm the program director for Trio Upward Bound, EC, MLC. We'll dig into that a little deeper right now. I just want to introduce my precious student from our program, Trio Upward Bound. She's currently now a student at SIUE, and we are so proud of her. Yes. She has achieved so much. She's come such a long way. She has an amazing backstory, and she said, how much should I tell? I said, well, you tell what you feel you want to tell. So please welcome her as she come and tell about her experience with us at the SIUE Trio Upward Bound.
Good afternoon. On behalf of all Trio Upper Bound former students, I would like to say thank you. As stated previously, my name is Reggie Jones, and I am a sophomore at Southern Illinois University, Edwardsville, majoring in civil engineering. But I am also a former SIU Trio student. Being raised in the middle of East St. Louis and Cahokia, there was little to no way to excel outside of school. I knew I had to work hard to break the generational curses of coming from a big single-parent household out of poverty. So many of my peers were killed because of the route they took within the community. SIUE Trio Upper Bound allows its staff to come into neighborhoods like mine and help the ones who want to succeed. It creates a path for people like myself to attend higher education and have a better chance at graduating with a degree. The trips and classes I took allowed me to see that I could not be a product of my environment because the world needed people like myself. I built many relationships within SIUE Trio Upper Bound. Some are still connections I have today. Mr. Cooper is one of the most valuable relationships I have from here. He started working for Trio my freshman year, and he has helped my friends and myself grow into the people that we are today. Though we are at university now, Mr. Cooper still calls and checks on us, ensuring that we do not need anything. He also allows us to give back to our community by letting us help out within the program in the summer. This experience and many others are necessary for me to have the mindset and commitment to obtain a university degree. Trio Upper Bound has allowed me to be a role model for my siblings and the children in my community. I truly appreciate everything you have done for me, and please continue to bring programs such as Trio Upper Bound into this neighborhood. We may not be able to change the past, but the future will be bright for the Metro East if programs like these continue to contribute to the community.
Thank you again, Virgie Jones, our little pupil. She's a little nervous, but as you see, she was confident enough to come here and tell you about her story. And if you have a little time of free time to talk to her, she'll tell you a little more about the achievements that she have overcome. Again, I'm a first generation and low income student as well. Unfortunately, I didn't have the privilege of Trio Upper Bound. I'm from a family of 14 out of a small city in Shaw, Mississippi. But it was a little struggle for me, but at the same time, it was a blessing for me. I had the opportunity to come work here at Trio Upper Bound. It was a love of mine. You know, I have a passion for the youth. I'm greatly excited about what we do here. We are a college preparatory program here in the city of Metro East, and the schools that we service are East St. Louis High School, Charter High School, Madison, Brooklyn, Lovejoy, and Cahokia. And what we do here is we really push our focus on building relationships. We can try to push the education down their throat, and push the trips down their throat, the extravagant speakers that we have coming in, but more importantly, we try to build lasting relationship with these kids. And we do that through our 4 pillars. We believe in trust, respect, integrity, and opportunity. With those 4 pillars, we are able to have students like Virgie Jones go off to college with full rides. We have students like her who are at multiple schools. But speaking specifically about the student at Trio Upper Bound, I wish I had this program. I wish I was part of something like this, but unfortunately I wasn't. But I can work for something like this. I work for Trio Upper Bound, and I gotta tell you, it is my passion. It's what I love to do. I get out of bed every morning excited to come to work. And that's what's important to me. I get to do what wasn't done for me when I was younger. I get to come here. I visit all the schools in the area. We recruit students that are interested in going to college who are first generation or low income, and we step in. We that deciding factor for them. So again, thank you. My name is Mr. Cooper. I am the program director for Trio Upper Bound for ECMLC.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
What's the enrollment in the Triple Crown
Jump on your stuff a little bit.
And then my second, because you talked about recruiting. How do you recruit and where do you recruit?
So our enrollment for our specific program for EC is 150. For MLC, we have 75 students. We recruit out of the middle school, starting in 8th grade. I've been able to tap into 7th grade recruitment to give them something to look forward to. The criteria are first generation low income. We also target a student who have a 2.5 or 3.0 or higher. Outside of schools, as far as like Mason, Clark, Lincoln, Worth. We also contact the schools as well. We have a great relationship with the counselors in all the schools that are named: East St. Louis, Cahokia, Brooklyn, Madison, Lovejoy, as well as Charter. And with those schools, we are able to sit down with them, the principal. We go to open houses. We are able to have sit downs inside the building. We have our own little spaces. So we have great ties with the schools. All we have to do is let them know we're on our way. You got any kids that might want to go to college, might not have a little extra help, invite us in, we'll give a presentation, and the rest take care of itself.
And one of the things Mr. Cooper did this summer, he didn't tell you, is drop off a bunch of middle school kids on his campus and left them to me. The first day I was exhausted at 11 o'clock and we went to 4:30. So as I told some of you on the tour, when we think about SIU East St. Louis campus, it's actually 8 locations, about 8 locations in 7 different areas. One of those locations is Collinsville High School. We actually have our own space there. Our staff also have email there and they have access to their system. And the program director for the Upward Bound Scholars Academy is Yvonne Hart.
Good afternoon. So I'm going to take it back a couple of steps because I don't know how many of you are familiar with TRIO and the name of TRIO. TRIO is not an acronym. It represents the first 3 programs that started during the War of Poverty in the 1960s. Upward Bound was the original program under the Economic Opportunity Act of 1964. Then Talent Search and Student Support Services were added in the late 60s. Currently, under TRIO, there are 9 programs. There's the Educational Opportunity Centers, there's Veterans Upward Bound, Ronald McNair, and Upward Bound Math and Science. SIUE Edwardsville has had TRIO programs since 1966. And we are currently funded with our new competitive grants that we're now finishing our we're starting our 2nd year. Wow, time flies. We're starting our 2nd year. We were re-awarded our grants last year, and we currently at SIU, we serve 285 high school students and 125 veterans through our Upward Bound programs. As Cooper mentioned, our population for Upward Bound is 2/3 of our population must be low income, which is 150% of the poverty level, and their parents did not graduate with a 4-year degree. As Dr. Staples mentioned, I am the director of the Upward Bound program in Collinsville. Traditionally, Upward Bound programs are sitting in university settings where the students are transported back and forth to after-school programs. When I had the opportunity to come to SIUE, and they said this was an in-school model, I loved it. I am also a TRIO alum. I did Talent Search in New York City. My dad never finished elementary school. My mom finished high school. So I was the first one and my brother to go through TRIO programs and then go to college and then earn our master's degrees. And we're all now in school counseling, school social work careers. And so I've worked, wow, I'm not gonna say my age, but I've been doing this a long time. So that is who we serve. We skipped the order, so let's see. Talking about collaborations, we rely heavily on interacting with different departments at SIUE. One of those departments is the core team. They provide workshops. They are on the enrollment side of the SIUE student services. In addition, this summer, I was able to work with the industrial engineering department. The chair approached me and said, there's not enough students interested in industrial engineering. And I said, that's because we don't know what it is. We don't know, we know about construction and mechanical and civil. No one's ever heard of it in industrial engineering. And he's just like, exactly. And so he wanted to pilot a summer program with us. We had 21 Upward Bound students participate this summer. And I am going to introduce to you Aiden Montgomery, who was one of those 21 students. And so he can tell you about his experience in the industrial engineering program. All right.
Good afternoon. So I'm Aiden Montgomery. I'm a sophomore at Collinsville High School. And okay, so I joined in the summer of freshman year, before freshman year, because I didn't know where I was gonna go or what I wanted to specialize in because I was pretty confused. I don't remember the difference between like college and university. But so at the program, we did all these like fun types of activities with industrial engineering. So one of them was like a supply chain, like online type thing where we were kind of like split up into groups and we got to like be a certain part, like someone was like the wholesale and all that type of stuff. And it got really out of control because you were supposed to try to make it like as cheap as possible, but then it started costing like millions of dollars. And then there was like a paper plane making activity, which is more like of a physical version of it, where you were like some person would cut up part of the paper and start the folding process. Then they would give it to another person who would continue the folding process, then do it. Then the third person would continue it again. And then the final person would like, you had to like color it or else it wasn't complete. And then you were given points based on how many you made. And then you were able to test one of them. And whichever one you threw the farthest got like extra points. And my team did the best because I carried in throwing the paper airplanes both times. And then we went to Boeing, which was actually really fun because we got to like see around this whole place, which not a lot of people get to see. And my grandpa actually used to work at Boeing, but then he retired. So I never really got to see like what he did, but being able to go there and see it was pretty cool. And that seems like a pretty good thing for like other high school students to be able to kind of go through because they get to like get a hands-on feel for what goes on in industrial engineering. Like you can always like read about it, but it's never as good as being able to like actually be there and like kind of experience it yourself. And because of Upward Bound, I was able to narrow it down. At the moment, I'm thinking like computer science or something like that.
So, thank you, Aiden. This is the first time speaking.
Nice job.
Both Cooper and I try our best to develop different relationships with the university. Is that with the core team coming into our high schools or here and providing workshops or their workshops on the main campus. So for industrial engineering, we were in their space and the 21 students were being taught by their staff and their graduate students. So it was a great experience. And so I want to reiterate, TRIO works. As an alum myself, I was a program director of Upward Bound back in New York. And I did that for a good 6 years. And there are students now that I knew in the 90s there's a Fulbright scholar, they're doctors, they're teachers, they're veterinarians. And so when I saw this opportunity here, I was just like, I got to continue the legacy. And so as a proud TRIO alum, TRIO works, and I'm very happy that SIU has it on campus.
Okay.
you all for getting Aiden a warm welcome, because then he won't go back and tell people not to talk to me. You see, I'm on campus on Wednesdays and there's summer program. I just do a run through like, how you doing? How you doing? Thank you for being a part. And Aiden talked to me a long time. So when I wanted a student, I said, Aiden. So hopefully you'll tell students to talk to me when I come through. Our last part, we want to really highlight what we're doing at the university through our Office of Online Services and Educational Outreach. Maggie Irvin will tell you some exciting things that not only we're doing through Upward Bound, but that is going out also into the East St. Louis High School. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Maggie Irvin. I'm the Specialist of Alternative Credit and Credentials, and I'm super humbled to be surrounded by people driving these programs and students who are succeeding like this. So thank you. I'm here to tell you a couple of things that our office, the Office of Online Services and Educational Outreach, is doing in collaboration with the East St. Louis campus. We've held space in this campus for several years now, and our office offers staff training, non-credit courses, and supported different programming on site. So there are two new activities that we are collaborating on. I'm excited to share them with you. The first one is a 4-credit college credit course for Upward Bound students. This hopefully will become a series of courses in the future, and it's going to start in October. The College of Arts and Sciences will offer a 10-week American Literature course at our campus here for interested Upward Bound students. This course will focus on African American literature, seminal works within the American literary tradition. It will allow students to earn pre-collegiate college credit, much like an AP course or a dual enrollment course, courses that are often widely available to students at more affluent schools, but that might not otherwise be available to our students here. The credits are transferable, but we hope that this will provide a pathway to credit at SIU schools, and our office will work to support with robust and excellent student support services the students who participate, anticipating a 90% or better retention rate. Second slide, please. The second collaboration involves alternative digital credentials. Alternative digital credentials provide opportunities for rapid, targeted training to help students earn new, highly desired skills, or for those who are currently in the workforce and wish to upskill. These icons represent alternative digital credentials. They're sometimes called badges or micro-credentials. They're industry-aligned programs, and they're in high demand. And our students for these programs reside not just in high schools, but also in the workforce if someone is looking to upskill. For instance, we have a cohort right now at Tyson Caseyville. SIUE has been working in the alternative digital credential space since 2017. These credentials are vetted and they are approved through a faculty steering committee. Once earners successfully complete a program of studies and earn this credential, they then accept the digital credential and place it on their resume or in various social media places. And that then is embedded with skill tags and metadata. Because of blockchain technology, these are secure. You can't just copy and paste them and toss them places. They are secure and credible. They make it easy for employers to locate employees with the skills they are seeking out. Smaller credentials, such as the red ones, stack to form what we call a constellation, and people can culminate their credential progress with a larger one in the constellation. This particular credential is the laboratory technician credential, and it's what is going to be occurring here for Upward Bound students who are interested in two cohorts. There's a fall cohort and a spring cohort, but we have additional plans to expand to other schools in the community in the future. Finally, in partnership, one more slide, please. In partnership with the company that has created the St. Louis Science Center Escape Room, we have developed a mobile escape room where the tasks to escape are related to laboratory technician skills. An escape room, just to offer some context, is a game room of sorts. It's like a puzzle where teams work together to unearth clues and devise strategies, overcome obstacles, and escape a given room. And they have to do it in a limited amount of time. For our students, that's 20 minutes. It'll be 20-minute increments, and 6 students at a time can participate. Our escape room is titled Lab Technicians Save Lives, exclamation point. So it should be good fun. The escape room will be coming here in October, the 11th specifically, and we have set aside time specifically for our Upward Bound students to participate, and then it's open to the community to give it a go. So I close with pictures from cohorts that completed the lab technician credential this past summer, and with us giving the escape room a go from the staff perspective, and we did achieve it. So, thank you.
Thank you. Any questions? All right. Thank you.
Thank you very much. When I was driving up here, I didn't know where I was gonna park, and I saw Tim out there, and I looked at him and he looked at me, and he pulled up a picture that looked like me, you know. I knew I was in the right place.
Okay, the next item is the FY 2024 operating budget discussion. President Mahoney, will you introduce this item?
Yeah, we have the budget to present today, and I'll start with SIU Edwardsville, so Chancellor Minor. Start with you.
President Mahoney. Board of Trustees, I'll start with a bit of good news as I talk about the FY 24 budget that is contained in the packet. I want to begin with how we concluded FY 23. You may remember last year this time, we discovered at SIUE a pretty significant budget deficit, a structural deficit. And so I'm pleased to report that we're starting FY 24 with a budget deficit that has been reduced by about 2/3, which is pretty significant. We started in FY 23 with an $18 million structural deficit. We've been able to reduce that by about $12 million. If you look at table 1, which is the first sheet for SIUE, there are 2 things. It's a pretty explanatory sheet. There are 2 things that I will call your attention to. One is the $4.1 million planned expenditures that represents the work that we have to do for FY 24 in terms of reducing the balance of that structural deficit. And then the $2.4 million revenue bond item here, which is a planned expenditure for feasibility study for Cougar Village, which is one of our older housing facilities on campus, if you've ever been there, and software for housing. So those are planned expenditures in the revenue bond operations category. On the second sheet, I'll just point out to you 2 variances that I think may catch your eye. I'm really happy if you look at the budget for FY 23 and the actuals, I think we're in pretty good shape. Very pleased to say that we were able to reconcile a big portion of our structural deficit without spending cash reserves. And so when you look at the income fund from 23, we're from the budget category to the actual category, we're actually able to increase the size of the cash reserves for the university. 2 other categories that I'll mention just quickly, the grants and contracts. You may be wondering, how is it that you sort of underestimated by roughly $15 million for grants and contracts? There are 2 explanations here. One is increases in Pell and MAP, and the other are increases in grants and contracts, which is pretty significant. I'm not concerned about the line. When I look at the FY 24 budget, it is one of the categories where you really can't overspend. And so you'll see, unlike other categories where the amount that is budgeted does represent the actuals. Last thing I'll mention again is the revenue bond operations category. You'll see variations from the budget and actuals. We had lower debt service payments for FY 23 based on delayed spending on some of the categories and prepayments for our debt service. So that's what is represented there. The last thing I'll just mention quickly, as you turn to page 3 in the budget, are a couple of things. It outlines, again, the FY23 plan and the existing structural deficit, the net adjustments based on state appropriations, and the remaining structural deficit for the university. I will say there are a few things that I think we will plan to do going forward. One, we have been very intentional about aligning our financial resources with our strategic priorities. That has been a point of focus for the university. A second thing that I'll mention, we have made a pretty significant change with respect to our hiring process and the allocation of university positions. We refer to it as the strategic position alignment process. It is a way to expand and contract positions, which is really the most expensive category for most universities. So that will be ongoing for the university. We've been able to optimize our course schedule, which will be ongoing work to really make sure we're maximizing our academic resources. The third thing I'll just mention is modernizing our business operations. This is a big issue for the university. I think there are probably several areas, I won't go into them here, where we have to modernize our business practices in order to find additional efficiencies. And then the last thing I'll mention is our interest in updating our budget reporting systems to be able to produce real-time reports for multiple areas across the universities. I think today we find that there's a lag in financial reporting, which can be costly if you're not careful. And so we will undergo a process where we will actively update our financial reporting systems to improve our ability to have real-time budget reporting. So I'll stop there and ask if there are any questions, President Mahoney.
Yeah, any questions for Chancellor Minor?
Yes, one. What's the plan the timeline to get these updates made?
So right now, Bill Winter and I think by the end of the month, if not early October, we will invite a consultant who will go through our budget reporting systems. And I know we've got a system, we've got patches of more modern systems. But I think between now and the end of the calendar year, we should at least have a report and recommendations about how to update our budget system reporting capabilities.
And a follow-up question, and Mr. Chancellor Lane, does the same thing happen on the Carpenter campus?
Yes, I'll mention kind of where we are on that project through our Power BI and some of our dashboards.
Okay, good enough. Thank you.
So as I understand it, the Chancellor Minor, in FY24, you'll be eliminating the structural deficit?
That is the plan, and it is very aggressive, Chair Gilbert. I think last year when we began this process to cover $18 million in 2 fiscal years is pretty aggressive. So that is the plan. We have maintained the course so far. I don't want to speak too early, but I think the hope and the expectation is by the end of the year, we would have reconciled the structural deficit.
That's not aggressive. That's just flat out amazing.
Yeah, thank you.
From what you walked into.
Thank you.
One question that I have, and correct me if I'm misunderstanding, this says that the available cash that is being shifted to cover the structural deficit is from self-supporting accounts. Could you detail what those sources are a bit more for me?
So there are 2 major budget categories for the university. Roughly speaking, we refer to it as stateside, and then there are budget categories where housing, dining, other auxiliaries that generate revenue have cash balances in those accounts. And so because we have available cash, if you look on the first page, it looks like this. In the second to last column, you'll see self-supporting activities. And if you go all the way down to the bottom, you'll see a pretty significant balance of available cash. Now, we don't want to rely on that. It's not a great budget model to rely on available cash, but there are one-time resources that we can use from self-supporting activities to cover existing budget deficits. So it is housing, dining, the muck store, things that we do at the university that generate revenue.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Chancellor Minor? All right, now I'll turn it over to Chancellor Lang.
Thank you, President Mahoney, and I'll start my presentation off by thanking Susan Simmers. I'm not sure how we got her here almost a year ago, Susan, but I kept telling her when we were interviewing her, trying to give her as much information as I could, to share with her that we had a little bit of work to do, right? And Susan has come in with her team and has just done a tremendous job of uncovering some things and helping us move in the right direction to be able to sustain some of these efforts. So I want to thank Susan publicly for all the work she's doing. She needs a number 2, 3, and a number 4. And to your point, Dr. Hightower, I ask every day, right, where are the dashboards? And I know that she's working with Will, our IT CIO, and getting that information on our executive reporting piece where we can actually see in real time what we look like. Budget managers have appreciated already getting some of that information now to start the year so they have a better idea about where their money is and what we need to do to spend. So on the first slide that we have in your packet, I want to highlight a few things. Obviously, there's an increase in our state appropriation. We're excited about that. Increase in our tuition revenue to the tune of about 3.6 million. We've been able to grant raises for our employees over the last 3 years after only 1 year of raises at 1% between fiscal year 2015 and fiscal year 2021. We thought that was going to be extremely important given the number of years without having those increases. So the focus is still there. Through our CBA agreements with faculty, they will receive the largest pay increase in a number of years, and certain civil service groups will be increased as well. We have been working on addressing the internal equity pay issues among A&P and civil staff and continue to work with Faculty Senate and Faculty Association President on conducting this fall, actually, a faculty equity study to look at what adjustments need to be made within the faculty to retain some of that talent that's there. So a lot of work to do there. On the second slide, you probably remember those of you that were here before I was in 2017, and it was a plan that was supposed to run from 17 to 2024. It was the financial sustainability plan. We had basically depleted about $38 million that we needed to commit to the board to say, what are we going to do to pay that back? So on our campus, it's known as the payback. And I'll talk a little bit about that here in just a second. But the idea in that plan this year, in the numbers that you see, we actually have about 3.5 million that we're saying we're going to pay back. We're a little more aggressive than that. This is the last year, right, Susan? And we want to get 12 million of that paid off and get it out of our way. And that's the plan. And how are we going to do that? We're going to do it through what we call a hiring chill, not a freeze, but a hiring chill, and try to get most of that through personnel savings and just not automatically rehiring in some of those positions. In a number of other different ways, but to really try and knock that down by the end of this fiscal year. Susan will be keeping tabs on that for us throughout the year, to your point, so we know exactly what we look like. There's also some sources of DE funds, not the funds that we use to fund faculty positions, but these are for non-personnel positions. We're going to scrutinize those a little harder this year. Those are for one-time buys that folks were using. So this year, we're going to really watch that. Our new provost is going to be keeping tabs on that for us. So we really think that we'll be able to get to that $12 million final year of the payback this year. So we can do some other creative things. Obviously, we've got to build our reserve back and do some other things to reallocate some resources. So we're again, that's going to be the biggest part of our plan going forward. On the last slide, there are some things that we need to focus on. I mentioned the state appropriations and tuition revenue, that those amounts for us equal about $9.1 million. We do have some ongoing commitments that we need to adhere to. Obviously, in the represented employees with the contracts that we've worked out with our faculty and others, we've got some commitments there. This will be as I mentioned on the first slide, probably the highest pay increase for faculty that they've had in a number of years. And so that's a really good thing. But as we start to look at their contract, which I think is up at next year, we're back to the table again. So we are going to need to be thinking about that. But in this budget, it gives you an idea about what we do with represented employees. Our estimated salary increases for non-represented employees. We're proposing a 2% increase there. That amounts to about 800 and some odd thousand. We're still in the adjustment phase. We think this 2% will help the work that we're trying to do in the equity game on our campus for our employees that are still not quite where they need to be. Again, back to talent retention and making sure that we can attract candidates that come in as well. There's the minimum wage increase. We're still making sure we deal with that in a positive way. You've got folks obviously that we talk to all the time about where they are with minimum wage and how tough that can be for those individuals. You see some benefit increase numbers in here, and then obviously in Susan's area, some of the repair and maintenance of our buildings is a concern. We want to make sure that doesn't fall too far apart. The last piece, again, I mentioned 3.5. We're trying to go to that $12 million number. So again, a lot of work will happen over the next 9 months. Susan, I think we had 10 when we were talking. We're already at 9. So it's a very lofty endeavor for us, but we have talked to all of our constituency leads on campus. They support it. They understand they want to get it out of the way this year in reference to the payback. They're tired of it too. They've lived with it a lot longer than I've been here. They've lived with it since 2017. So we've got the commitment from the campus community to really try and tackle this. We do know it'll be a little painful with the positions that we won't be able to automatically fill because we're going to keep those and trying to create some lap salary there. So but that is the goal this year, is to try and move in that direction. So I'll stop there and be glad to answer any questions.
That's the question. It is my thing. I missed it. Pay back to whom? Yeah.
To you.
Because one faculty member asked me just day before yesterday. And I was not sure. I did not answer. I said, I have to check.
Yeah, that plan is, well, really to ourselves. It's $38 million, but that sustainability plan was a commitment that was made in 2017, if I'm not mistaken, that we would honor that and we would pay that back. So each year we've averaged probably $3 to $5 million that we've all collectively on campus been able to pull from different sources and say, that's going towards the payback this year. We want to.
Is it part of the reserve or is that
no?
Separate?
So the reserve went to. Okay. Yeah. So the idea is to pay this back and then rebuild the reserve, and then look for ways to get healthy in that regard.
Because your deans told the chairs, directors, and someone asked me.
Yeah.
And I didn't want it to say without knowing the details.
Yeah. What used to happen, maybe in the first 2 years of me being here, and this was not a best practice. So because we didn't have some of that financial forecasting and we didn't have all the intelligence as it relates to budget, we would ask the deans and others to give us a payback in like March or April. Well, good luck. Right? Those folks
we have done that
all the way through their fiscal year almost, and they couldn't find it in some cases. So we thought this year we'd be a little more proactive and do it on the front end. It's not grabbing any dollars from any of those divisions now. It's really just holding the line on the personnel positions to create that.
So just to explain to everybody, what they decided at the time, and I certainly understand that, was to take a $38 million cut in 1 year was just not possible to do. And so the reserves basically was wiped away and there was a $38 million deficit. And they've been trying to get back to zero ever since, which is quite challenging to do.
So this is the system reserve.
No, Carbondale.
Campus.
It is the
Yeah, Carbondale, yeah. And I will say occasionally we'll hear this relates to a loan from Edwardsville to Carbondale that never happened.
Yeah.
But that's
what
often
I
talked
was-
about. So it doesn't affect anything that Edwardsville or things that Chancellor Minor talked about. This was uniquely a Carbondale issue.
Yeah. Okay.
Would you repeat that again?
There was no loan from Edwardsville to Carbondale.
He wrote a white paper
Paid
on
back, yeah. We actually got a note from a faculty member saying that last year. That,
Yeah,
this
yeah,
was
white
way back to Edwardsville. I was like, that never happened. So no.
That is the word still going on the campus.
Yes.
Carbondale campus.
And I keep trying to dispel that myth, but yes. So thank you, Dr. Hightower, for asking me to repeat it, so I can continue to try to dispel that myth.
Yes. I think this is just awesome. And Phil, when you and I came back on, and this was the discussions, serious discussions that we began to have, and to see the leadership under President Mahoney move forward with making these positive changes is very, very gratifying. The question that I have, though, I asked a question, how long would it take to upgrade? Are we having discussions with Edwardsville's leadership, Carbondale's leadership? Or are you guys just doing it independently of each other?
We've actually had a group.
Would you talk about that?
Yeah, so we've actually had a group that's been looking at that, both the HR system, the financial system, actually collaborating really well together and thinking. Again, it's what I've said, I think, several times, but when we can do it together and it makes sense, we'll do it together. If we have to be somewhat different at times because that makes the most financial sense or whatever, then we're doing it, but we're doing it in a thoughtful way when we're different. When we can be the same, we'll be the same.
Okay.
So, but they have had those discussions. Yeah, Susan's been very involved in those discussions. So.
Yeah. And we are seeing those changes.
Yeah. So some of it, yeah.
Okay.
And then it goes across even just the financial system. We were talking too about course registration, things like that. And so, yeah, there's a lot of systems where, again, we went in different directions, which frankly wasn't in our best interest in a lot of ways and didn't take advantage of the efficiencies and the sometimes cost savings when you do it together. But actually, one of the things I'll talk about in my presentation just a bit is an example of something we did together that actually saved us money by doing it together.
The one thing I would say is I'd like to first commend Chancellor Lane and his staff for having discussions proactively with the deans of our colleges and other people and their departments. Because even before I knew about some of the things happening here with our budget, they were aware. And they were aware of what their constraints were. And as opposed to the payback system to where they pay back to the Carbondale campus, now they know what they're working with. We have things forecasted out. And they know what their constraints are. And I feel like that's the way it needs to be. And I feel like that's been helpful for them being creative and how they want to use what they have. The one thing I have concern about and I've heard concern about is the hiring chill. I'm curious where we're going to see that most impact. I'm not too familiar with how this operates with faculty positions compared to administrative positions, civil service positions. Could you detail what's going to be most impacted and what is going to remain relatively unchanged? Are we still going to be seeing faculty search committees?
Yeah, Vic, that's a great question. So when we thought through that out of the gate, the impact is a lot heavier on A&P and civil. Those positions obviously are positions that we're scrutinizing and looking at. When we did this, I think my first year we did a hiring too. And we did that without impacting faculty positions because obviously faculty positions were generating the contact hour enrollment. So we didn't want to stop that hiring. Right now, our faculty positions are here, thank goodness. So we're out of that storm because we hired them back in the spring and summer and they started this fall. So a lot of this will be on top of A&P and civil. So we really wanted to work with them early on about what positions. The good news is we started bringing back a lot of positions 2 years ago. So we used to have a lot of concern on our campus where a staff member said, hey, I'm doing 2 and 3 jobs. And it's because they were. And so we started to rehire some of those positions very slowly and bring them back so we wouldn't have that constraint on top of staff members. So we think for the next 9 months when we look at, and Susan's also cleaning up some positions where we've over budgeted some things too. So there's a pretty significant savings we think we're going to also find in just cleanup work. Okay. So I think we'll, as we committed to the constituency leads, especially in A&P and civil, is that I personally, along with Susan and then our budget and planning committee, will talk every month with them about where we are, even our HR director, and just in terms of what people need. There are some exceptions to certain positions. So if one comes forward, we may actually make an exception or two, but not very many, because it'll get us out a lot.
Yeah, that clarifies a lot. So just to be sure I understand, we're looking at just the academic year for this hiring chill.
Yeah.
Okay.
Next 9 months.
That's good. Thank you.
So most of this hiring chill, as you call it, we're not laying anybody off.
No.
It's just people when they retire or
resign.
we're just not filling certain positions in order to save.
That's it. Yes.
Any other questions for Chancellor Lane? Dean Cruz?
Thanks. Our budget report for the School of Medicine is 3 pages. I'll start with the first one, Table A. If you take a look at the green column all the way to the right, all funds 2024 totals. Take a look at the bottom 2 lines. The total budget is $302 million, and there's a planned operational deficit of $8.8 million. And I'll provide an explanation for that. So there are 156 medical schools in the US. 34 of them are community-based medical schools. SIU School of Medicine is one of the 34 community-based schools. Those schools have 2 defining characteristics. 1, they don't own a hospital or a health system. And 2, they're regional in nature with many sites that have self-contained educational programs and have partnerships with local hospitals. So for us, our partners in Central Illinois are Memorial Health, HSHS, Hospital Sisters Health System in Western Illinois, Blessing Health System in the Metro East area, BJC Healthcare, and Alton Memorial Hospital, and in the southern part of the state, Southern Illinois Healthcare, Carbondale. So we were born because of partnerships with these hospitals, and we thrive and we grow because of those partnerships. Now, if you go back to FY23, our finances, our revenue for FY23, those can be broken. It's not really anything to look at, but it can be broken into 4 categories. 1, clinical activity, that's 48% of our revenue. And if you're looking at the budget sheets, there's several pieces of each that go into each of those columns. But if you tease them out, 48% of our revenue is clinical activity, 28% is hospital support, 12% is state appropriations, 12% is grants, contracts, tuition, and everything else. So 28% is academic support from our partner hospitals. That's a large amount. But all of our hospital partners and most hospitals in the United States have had a very difficult financial time over the past 2 years. Most of them have experienced gains in revenue, but those gains have been flattened, more than offset by astounding rises in expenses, so that they have large operational deficits. I think many of you in the room can feel that, as a matter of fact. This is explained mainly by 2 factors. First, an eye-watering increase in the cost of labor. Scarcity of nursing and clinical personnel, traveling nurses. The cost of nursing labor has increased by more than 300% in some hospitals. And in a time of inflation of 8%, the hospitals continue to get fixed payments from governmental and almost fixed payments from private sources. So because of the large operational deficits, the hospitals of necessity have reduced their support to us. So if you look at the column just to the left of the green column, self-supporting activities, the academic support provided by hospitals is one of several items that's in that column, self-supporting activities. So when our budget from FY22 2 years ago is compared to this budget for FY24, there's been a decrease in hospital support from 90 million to 65 million, an absolute decline of $25 million, a percentage decline of 28%. But we've had some significant revenue gains. The clinical practice has grown by an astounding 40% from the pre-pandemic year to now, and has a great positive operational surplus. There's a 7% increase in state appropriations. There's been a dramatic increase in extramural grants and contract funding and indirect increase in indirect cost recovery. And you can see all of those things on page 2 if you want to put it together. But just with the big picture, when you put everything together, the large decrease in hospital funding coupled with the gains in appropriations and clinical practice and grants and contracts and indirect cost recovery comes to a budget deficit of $8.8 million on the operational side. So for 1 year, we plan to cover this with operational reserves. We're in good shape with operational reserves. They actually went up by about $15 million last year. So this, when we do this, this will help our hospital partners with their financial coverage because almost everything we're talking about here are clinical people. And if we cut the clinical people, we cut business to the hospitals and it gets to be a vicious cycle. And just remember, the hospitals have helped us in many times of significant need. So we're going to return the favor there and we're going to try to adapt to a new world. We hope that the hospitals will get back on their feet and get back where it was before. We know it probably never will be exactly the same. But like I said, we're ready to adapt. On page 3, I just have to point out one error. New sources of funding, state appropriations and tuition rate, the numbers are flipped. It should be for state appropriations 2.589 million and for tuition 1.013. So that's where we are with this one.
Any questions for Dean Cruz?
Said that we shouldn't expect a return to previous normals while your reserves are good now. Is there a plan to actually move towards more sustainable models? I understand that it's a vice on both sides.
Yeah, there's a lot of things. I mean, we're using this as a transition year right now. We've actually seen a couple of our hospitals have really a significant turnaround and almost getting to break even on a quarterly basis now. Some have not yet. And so we think we need to give that enough time to go. I've told everyone that we don't want to budget a deficit for FY25. And we really don't. Are we getting close to a hiring chill? I'd say we probably are, as a matter of fact, but we can't have a chill for clinical positions. We just can't. I mean, we still have a shortage of nurses and frontline personnel for sure. It hasn't been hard hiring physicians, thank goodness. But anyway, like I said, it's a year of big planning. This is unexpected things with the hospitals. Most of them have not experienced it in the lifetime of the leaders of the hospital. So we're all trying to do this together.
Dean Cruz, talk a little bit about this personnel issue and the escalating costs. What's going to happen? What do you see happening within the next 5 years? How do we alleviate that?
Well, the traveling nurse issue, the really high costs of nurses for each of the hospitals has peaked and has started to come down. But the decline slope is not nearly the slope of the rise. And some have been surprised that it's been so slow. We think that with a new generation of nursing and frontline clinical trainees, they'll see that actually there's been an adjustment to higher salaries, even though they might not be the astronomical salaries of the traveling nurses, and it might be more attractive careers. Quite frankly, also, some were scared away by the pandemic. It was like, man, this is really dangerous, and it's the work was just so strenuous that some people left and will never come back, and so it'll just take a little time for that to refill again, I think. So what's the 5-year outlook? I don't know exactly, but we're seeing some movement in the right direction now.
So you're optimistic?
Oh yeah, I mean we've been pretty fortunate in hiring people. Before the pandemic, we normally had 130 to 150 open positions at any one time. Then during the pandemic, it went it went up to 400, 500, 600, and it just stayed up there. And we're down to the 150 to 170 level now, so almost back to pre-pandemic levels for open positions at any one time. So we have some good signs going. Actually, what Chancellor Lane and Chancellor Miner referred to the business analytics part of it, John Horvat and his team have done a great job of ramping that up for us, and we're operating with more point in time data now that's going to help us with that. So I mean, a lot of things looking in a good direction, a few not, then we'll just, we'll deal with it, you know?
Yes. Yeah.
Anything else?
Unless there's any other questions,
Any other
that's.
questions?
our
Thank you,
presentation
Jerry.
of the budget.
Okay, the next item is a presentation on the future of enrollment by President Mahoney.
Yes, sure. Thank you. And a few things at the front end. Speaking longer than I usually do, so I'm warning you now. Yeah, Dr. Hightower, I'm warning you that it will be a little longer than I usually speak. I'm usually succinct. This is gonna take a little longer, but it's because it's important. But I will tell you tomorrow, I will not be presenting as part of my president's report. I really felt it went better with the discussion, frankly, we just had. And so today made more sense. And tomorrow, instead, I'll be ceding my time to the Office for Community Engagement and Institute for Rural Health so they can give you an update. And this is a presentation that we will be doing, the chancellors and I, on each of the campuses. Because I think it's important that we have a common understanding, and part of the reason for doing this today is that we have a common understanding of where we've been, where we're at today, and where we're headed. And I'm not sure that consistently exists across all parties. And I also think the other thing, and I found this across many years in higher education, is we always look at our problems if somehow we're unusual. And which we'll quickly find out is that most of us are fairly similar across the country as higher education institutions. And it's important that we do that. So I'm going to start as a son of a history teacher on the next slide with how did we get here? And I think it's important to understand, and I've been in higher education, been actually at higher education institutions. This is my 38th year, either as a student or an employee, and 30th year as a faculty member. So I've been around for a while, and I've lived two different lives. During the early part of my time in higher education, enrollment increases were pretty much the norm nationally. Really, after World War II, the GI Bill, universities just grew from really the kind of mid to late 40s on. And even I started as a faculty member in 1994, 98 to 2011, there was a 25% increase in enrollment nationally. So that's not SIU, but that's the national increase. So everybody was going up. And I'll just give you one example that I kind of reflected on. When I was at the University of Louisville as an assistant professor, I made some major changes in our academic program. I doubled the enrollment in the program. You know what the reaction was? No one cared. Not a single person said thank you. Not a single person said good job. No one cared that I doubled enrollment in the program. And I will say, I didn't do anything to double enrollment. I tried to make us the best program we could be nationally, and I accidentally increased enrollment by doing that. And again, that's just an interesting point of where we were. No one really cared that we increased enrollment in that particular program. Growth was a given. You just kind of keep doing what you're doing. In fact, the only comment I got was, how come you're spending so much money on part-time faculty? I had to explain because my enrollment doubled. But they seem to be more as a trouble than actually a benefit to the institution because, again, enrollment growth was the norm. And that was important because it helped to offset what was starting to be declining state appropriations across the country. Illinois is not unusual, but using Illinois as an example, from 2002 to 2019, our allocations went down 25% and about 50% if you look at it from a present value standpoint. So basically lost about half of the resources we were getting from the state. Again, not unusual. This was happening in most states. The timing might have been different when the decreases started and the amount may have been different, but the fact that they decreased was different. And some people know this fairly well. What I also think is not often focused on is not only was the general appropriations and the operating funding going down, and this came to me when I was actually watching a presentation on the university campus from some architects at Kent State, and they showed us every decade starting from 1910. And you saw the buildings, just like a few here, a few there. And in the 60s and 70s, it explodes. There's a huge growth in number of new buildings. What that means today is deferred maintenance in virtually every building. You think about the life expectancy of things. So the deferred maintenance we're dealing with is not an unusual thing. And when you think about a lot of that money came from the state or it came from that enrollment growth. Those were probably the two major sources of funding. The enrollment growth, as we'll talk about, went away, and also the state funding went away. By the time I was at the University of Louisville, we used to get a new building every 2 years, and I thought that was normal and was going to be for the rest of my career. It stopped being for the rest of my career. The groundbreaking at Edwardsville, I think, is the first groundbreaking I've attended since I left Louisville for a new building on a campus. So thank you to the state of Illinois for that. But that is actually an unusual thing today compared to the past. And again, not surprising, when they did a lot of these buildings in the 60s and 70s, no legislator wants to put a lot of money into a deferred maintenance fund that will be used 30 years from then. That's not a really political viable thing. Private institutions sometimes are a little bit different. Sometimes the donors gave that kind of money. We just don't have that for any of our buildings. So again, that's not an unusual thing, but it caused a real cost increase. So tuition revenue became critical. And enrollment therefore became critical. And what we saw happen, one is, fortunately, enrollment was going up, so that was a good thing. Tuition increases also started to escalate. If you look at the 6 years before 2011, tuition increases annually at Illinois public institutions were 10% a year. So 10% a year, every year for 6 years was the normal, that's the average in the state. When I was at the University of Louisville, I can remember one year that we went up 9.9%, and we bragged everybody because we were the only ones who didn't go up double digits. And that was a point of pride. We went up 9.9%. And in fact, several of the institutions that year had mid-year increases as well as whatever their 10, 15% increase was. And that was, again, helping to fund the universities. And it was possible because enrollment was going up. Because enrollment was going up, they could afford to increase tuition at that kind of rapid rate. In 2008, we hit the financial crisis. And in 2008, what we see is that the state more rapidly decreases funding in most states. And I will say, I was an administrator at Kent State at that time. That is the first conversation I ever had about, hey, we need to increase enrollment, was in 2008. And it was largely because of the financial crisis. But again, it wasn't hard to do at that time. My college, we went up about 15%. The university went up about 10%. We were still able to do it with some really relatively easy strategies. All of that starts to change in 2011. In 2011, and you can look at it in most states, we start to see a decline or at best steady enrollment for most regional universities. Flagships were a little different, and I'll get to that in a second. This was particularly true in the Northeast of Midwest, where the highest number of high school students was starting to decline already. We also saw less high school students, and we've really seen this since 2011, choosing to go to college. So the percent going to college declined, and in many places, the numbers themselves declined. The flagships tended to continue to grow, and in some cases rapidly. Part of that was to fund all of the buildings that they were still able to fund by rapidly increasing their enrollment. So they had built financial models based on rapid enrollment increases and were, at least in some cases, fairly successful. But even in some of the flagships, and if you've read recently, West Virginia University has done some pretty dramatic budget cuts because they're not going up anymore. So even some of the flagships, it's been challenging. Regionals have generally, again, been flat or declining. Few exceptions. Some states, there's still huge enrollment growth because high school seniors are still growing rapidly. There's a few urban institutions that have been able to take advantage of the large population there, but by and large, most have had that same type of decline. The differences I found in Illinois when I looked at this, and I looked at this actually back when I was at Winthrop, is the decline started earlier and were bigger. So the impact was much more significant for our system during the years 2010 through 2019. SIUE went down 14% on FTEs. SIUC went down 43%. So 14% at Edwardsville, 43% during that decade. Again, not unusual, the declines, but the declines in Illinois tended to be a little bit bigger. Again, what that meant, and if you go back to our budget discussions, this often led to structural deficits. This led to using up all of the reserves and actually going beyond that in some cases. So what we just talked about is not, again, all unusual. This was a result of what happened there. What we also heard from both the chancellors was looking at hiring much more closely. That was not my experience in the early part of my time as a faculty. We had the tradition, one out, one in. Every time you lost somebody, you got somebody back. And then we added other positions on top of that because we could afford to. That is not the case. Much more scrutiny of adding physicians has been the norm lately. We have really rapidly increasing fiscal challenges for higher education institutions. We have declining state appropriations, declining or flat enrollment, and less tuition and fee increases. So remember, I talked about that 6 years of 10% plus. If you look at the 6 years starting with 2016, now that was the budget impasse year. If there was ever a moment where you think, all right, we're going to increase tuition to make up for that, that didn't happen. Across the state of Illinois, the average increase for the 6 years starting in 2016 was less than 2% a year. We don't see large tuition increases anymore. And that has created, again, challenges financially as well. On top of that, what happens is now you have a declining group of students, institutions that desperately need them. And it's pretty clear what happens in almost every business becomes much more competition. And the biggest competition is really on financial aid. And so the couple examples I'll use real quickly. I think I've shared several times. My daughter was a high school senior a few years ago. So I had her apply to 14 colleges. She was my secret shopper. So I could see what happened when she applied, and she applied mostly to public universities, a lot of flagships. The same type of institutions I applied for when I was a student back in the 1980s. So we could do kind of somewhat of and I will say, it's funny, my wife always says my daughter's just like me. She doesn't always say it with a smile on her face, but she's very much right. We're very much alike. And if you look at our academic records, our athletic records, and our student involvement in high school, we are practically the same person. It's almost the same. What I found with my daughter is about 80% of them gave her some type of scholarship. There was only 2 that didn't, and there were 2 flagships that have far more students than they know what to do with because of where they are regionally. Everybody else gave her money. On top of that, when she didn't accept offers, 3 of those actually gave her more money. In one case, $10,000 more a year after she just didn't respond. When I applied for colleges back when I did, I got offered from one college and it was $1,000 and it was still the most expensive school I applied to even after the $1,000. No one else gave me anything. So the competition for students at my daughter and my level has changed, but it's really changed for students at all levels. It's just a very different competitive environment. Another example I use is when I was in New Jersey. New Jersey, as a lot of people know, is the #1 exporter of high school students to colleges in other states. Illinois is #2, but New Jersey is #1. Rutgers started to, in order to keep students in state, what they call the Rutgers Scholars Program. They invited all of the #1 students in their class who were going to be high school seniors and all the national merit scholars to campus. And they had a competition where you did an essay contest and one student got a full ride scholarship. Everybody else got a free application. And we all showed up for it because that was actually a real good thing because no one was giving away free applications. I paid for almost none of my daughter's applications. Very different competitive environment. So we find is that it's become much more difficult to attract simply the same group of students that we would have been able to attract 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 40 years ago. This wasn't happening. We have 2 differences in Illinois that created some additional financial challenges. One was certainly the budget impasse. Chancellor Lane, the whole 38 million he talked about is all related to the budget impasse, and we're still dealing with the impact of that. It wasn't just that we didn't get money from the state. It also caused people to lose faith in higher education in the state. So I've done that analysis and you can see the enrollment declines that were already happening started becoming even quicker. So we probably lost several hundred students on both of our campuses simply because of the budget impasse on top of not getting the state funding. So it kind of hit us in 2 different ways. The other challenge that, at least fiscally, we have is the truth in tuition, which means every time we raise tuition, it only applies to freshmen. And that's been here since I think 2004. And so again, while good for students and it allows for much more transparency about and predictability about affordability, it also means every increase we do has a smaller impact, at least in the short term. And that's just one thing we have to manage when we're managing our budget. So again, if we look nationally, declining enrollments have become the norm. Since 2015, it's down 12% nationally, college enrollment. Keeping in mind, again, some of those flagships have grown rapidly. So the declines for everybody else is usually more than that 12%. When we look forward past 2025, which everyone has talked about as the enrollment cliff, the projections for regional universities is 10 to 20% additional decline from where we are today. And again, some of that's real easy demographics is from 2018 to 2019. There were about 6.6 million children less born than if we had stayed at the 2007 level. So just the birth rate went down, which means if they're not born in 2008 or 2009, they're not high school seniors 18 years later. They're just not there. And so they're just not there as much. And so that is something we know in the back is happening. So next slide, please. So as we're looking forward, we need to come up with some strategies and a couple things related to those strategies. I want to be clear, we're not abandoning high school seniors, we're not abandoning our traditional approaches. We will continue to recruit at the high schools in the area. We will continue to market to those students. We will do all those things. But if we think we're going to change enrollment dramatically simply by doing better job on that of recruiting and marketing to high school seniors. There's just not enough of them to grow enrollment in that way. So this means that these strategies all to some extent involve change. We cannot maintain the status quo. We can't do the things we did early in my teaching career and just count on things staying the same. They will not stay the same. They're going to change. And again, this is not different than really any industry where you see dramatic changes. You've got to change or you're in real trouble. And think of video stores as a good example. You got to change when the times change, and we need to change here too. The things cannot be accomplished by a single person or a group. Enrollment management people are really critically important to this. I will say it's interesting. I didn't even know we had an enrollment management person until we hired one actually away from SIU back at about 2005. It was the first time I even knew we had one at SIU at University of Louisville. And that person was 3 levels down from the president, which gives you some sense of how important that role is. Most of those people now report to the presidents or chancellors. Those have become critical roles. But to rely on that single person, that's not going to work. These are group things. We need everybody involved. Everybody plays a role in improving that. So there's kind of shared responsibility. I will say everything I'm going to talk about has been done someplace else. This is nothing new. There's models from other institutions or systems we can follow, and if we're smart, we will. And it was funny when I talked about this with some of my staff of doing this presentation and writing a white paper that goes along with this. They said, "Aren't you afraid that someone's going to steal the playbook?" I was like, "The playbook's already out there." The thing is, in higher education, we do a very bad job of changing and committing ourselves to systemic change. And so they know it's there. I'm just not sure they all will do it. And I think we have an opportunity if we do all of this to really make those changes. Next is they are all aligned with student and alumni success. Whenever I talk about changing, everybody always says, "Oh, we're going to dumb it down. We're not going to provide students the same education." None of that is true. This really is aligned with helping students to achieve what they are capable of achieving, of doing things that are positive. Again, remember my story from the University of Louisville. I made the changes to make the program better for students, and it attracted more students. It was not about doing something that made the program easier. In fact, we frankly made the program hard, but it was a better program. Last is none of these strategies are sufficient on their own. It's not like we can pick one of the 6 I talk about and say, we'll just do that, and then we're done. Your Chancellor Minor started a really great effort of focusing on retention, which I'll talk about in a second. And it's, talking about 283, which is the number to get the retention rate up to 90%. But keep in mind, 283 more students would have been fantastic for us financially, would have been fantastic for their students, their families. It still wouldn't close the gap of where we were this year. So we need to do more than just one thing. So next slide. So what are those things? Well, the first one is improving retention of the students currently enrolled. At this point, as a system, our retention rate in the first year is 70%, but we also lose people past that point as well. And there is frankly far more we can do, and there's far more opportunity to grow enrollment simply by keeping the students we already have as opposed to attracting new students. Again, the 283 effort is a good example. A group of us, Chancellor Lane, myself, and others went to Georgia State. Georgia State was a very similar student population to us, has done some wonderful things, both in their recruitment and retention of students that have proven to be very effective. Their graduation rate is one of the best for that group of students in the country, and they have no gaps between any groups of students. All students are achieving. Their African-American graduation rate actually is above the overall university graduation rate. They have done some things, and it's really about changing the way that they do things. We also know that it really matters if students feel that they belong, are supported, that we believe in them. The Black student scholar experience that Chancellor Minor really has helped push forward on the Edwardsville campus this year alone led to a 10.2% increase in retention for that particular population. Those types of programs work. And there's a lot we can do. We actually I've talked before about the grant from the Lumina Foundation that will help support some of the efforts that we want to do on doing that. It's interesting, some of the research actually shows that the growth mindset of the faculty member is more important to student success than their own growth mindset. In other words, if the faculty member believes in them and lets them know they believe in them, that's more impactful than if they believe in themselves. So there's a lot as faculty, and I still teach, so I consider myself a faculty, that we can do that can really help support this. And again, that's just one. Second one is improving the transition to our universities for transfers from community colleges and others. Some of you may have seen there was an article in the Chronicle of Higher Education recently that actually focused on Illinois specifically. Thank goodness not our institutions, but they focused on Illinois specifically, and it was not a pleasant article to read. It talked about all of the ways we make it very, very hard for people to come from one institution to another, particularly from community colleges. I used to work with a provost who said, there's a difference between rigor and rigidity, and we don't always seem to understand that very well. There's a lot of things we do to make it harder for students that have nothing to do with making it more challenging. In fact, we find often that community college transfers do as well or better than students who started with us when they get to us. They're certainly very capable, but we don't count certain classes. We don't do things. There's a lot we can do to clean that process up that makes it easier. And there are other universities that have done that. I know Arizona State does a wonderful job on their website of saying, just plug your classes in from your community college. We'll show you what you need to do. And they've made it seamless for students. And they're one of those places that have grown pretty rapidly. Also, the Saluki Step Ahead program, about a third of the increase that we had at Carbondale was specifically related to the Saluki Step Ahead program. We now have that with 40 institutions. That, again, will help us grow into the future. Again, good example of working really with community colleges, but really any institution, we should make it as easy as possible to transfer. And we frankly, higher education in general has not done a great job on this. We need to make better use of our financial aid dollars. In a competitive marketplace, what really happened is for many years, private institutions became pretty sophisticated on this because they've been doing this for a long time. Also, public institutions in the last decade were like, oh my gosh, we have to do the same thing. And we didn't really know how to do that, who to assign money to, how much money to assign. So we did it in a very frankly haphazard way. And sometimes it didn't actually increase enrollment at all. We just ended up providing more financial aid dollars. We're now working with the Education Advisory Board. I have mentioned that before. They're working on financial aid leveraging. So we're making the best use of every financial aid dollar we have in order to recruit the students that we want to recruit. That was, to your point earlier, Dr. Hightower, was a collaborative RFP that we did. We paid $20,000 less than my previous institution, which was a smaller institution, by doing it collaboratively as opposed to doing it separately. So it's a good example of when we work together, we can save money too. Again, this is critically important because we have more students with more need. That's the other demographic change that we see, is that a lot of the students now coming to college are ones that are, much like we talked about with our Upward Bound program, they're first generation college kids, they're low income students. Financially is critically important to their ability to come and be successful. I will say one of the things that Georgia State has done a very effective job at is retention grants. A lot of times students get here and they get to a certain point and don't have enough money to finish. They've actually done very effective at targeted retention grants to help those students get there. So there's a lot of different ways to think about financial aid dollars and how we use them in order to improve student success. Next is we need to recognize the changing demographics in recruitment. In addition to, frankly, we're attracting or recruiting more students from low incomes, we also see that students under 18 are no longer majority white in the United States. They are much more racially diverse, ethnically diverse than they ever were before. And we need to make sure our recruitment is matching the changing demographics. That can mean everything from Carbondale put together a Spanish recruitment ad. That's a good example. A lot of places are having admissions recruiters who speak fluent Spanish. That's not just communicating with the students, but it's more importantly, sometimes communicating with their families. And so thinking about who we're recruiting in the future and making sure that we're doing the right things in our recruitment. Also, international students is a whole different recruitment strategy. And while that market kind of went away for a few years, it seems to be doing a little bit better right now. Both institutions have done well on international recruitment in the last few years. But again, that takes different strategies and different things than we traditionally have done. And so we need to continue to focus on that. The other thing I will say is we've had a strong commitment as a system to anti-racism, diversity, equity, inclusion. That is one of those things that's the right thing to do and the smart thing to do at the same time. This is creating a sense of belonging for students. All of those things will help us in recruiting that changing demographics. So all of those things are frankly critically important for us. The next thing is increasing the number and capacity of destination programs. And I will point out destination programs is my term. I made that up years ago, but it's programs that basically we know students sometimes come for the university, but sometimes they come specifically for that program. When I took this job here, I was actually at a graduation of my previous institution about a week later, and one of the faculty members said, My child's going to Carbondale. I'm like, okay, why from South Carolina has a very generous merit scholarship program. Almost no students ever leave the state of South Carolina to go out of state. Why is he going to SIU Carbondale? Mortuary science. That's one of those destination programs. And mortuary science has actually been increasing enrollment pretty well over the last 4 or 5 years. We have several of those types of programs. At Edwardsville, if you look at that enrollment decline, that would have been a much larger decline if it was not for the nursing program and the online MBA program, both of which were growing pretty rapidly for a number of years. That offset losses in other areas. So those were the destination programs there. Aviation, automotive, all of those things at Carbondale have been destination programs. So how do we change that? One is looking at capacity. Part of the problem with some of those programs is they're at capacity. And one of the things we're looking at right now in Springfield is taking the aviation program there. That's one of those ways we can expand capacity and grow a program that might not have the space to grow where we currently are. The other thing is to change the number of those programs, create new programs as we have with cybersecurity recently. So that's a good example of adding programs where we know there's increased student interest. But even with programs maybe that are more traditional, or there are a lot of places, there are things you can do, whether it's creating new experiences for students as part of the program that distinguishes you. Part of the growth we had when I was at the University of Louisville, as I teach sport administration, is we had a great relationship with the athletic department, and we could pretty much guarantee every student that they could work for the athletic department in some capacity. And that was an athletic department people wanted to work for. That experience was a big part of one of the things we changed. And when I got there, we had no relationship with the athletic department. So creating that relationship, that alone made a difference. And sometimes it's simply better packaging. We did some research when I was at Kent State and some of the program names we had in our college. And I was like, do you want a program in this? And I'm like, no. What about this program? It was exactly the same program. We just changed the name, and also now they were all interested. So changing names, and that's some of what we did with our program too, changing names, changing course titles, doing things that make it more appealing. So it gets to the marketing efforts and promotion efforts of those programs. So there's lots of things we can do either to current programs or new programs that will create, again, more of those destination programs. Finally, is growing programs for populations that are not currently being adequately served. One of the big phenomenons years ago was the creation of the for-profit colleges. And the reason they were initially very, very successful was they targeted adult students who were seeking to come back and get a degree, working students, which frankly, most institutions, we were not serving well. So that was a population that was looking for education, and we were not equipped or prepared to really take that population on. They have declined some, but not because that population went away. They declined because more institutions have now decided that they're going to target that too. And frankly, most people would rather have a degree from Penn State or the University of Massachusetts than some of the for-profits. And so they started to enter that area. That area is actually growing. The pandemic actually made it grow probably faster. We have more students drop out during that period who will at some point want to come back and get a degree. We also have an environment in which the knowledge that's needed for jobs and skills is changing at a rapid pace, which means even people who may have a degree want to come back for additional credentials, certificate programs, things like that. We need to be better prepared to serve those. And that's one of the things I've talked about before is the SIU system online, where we're going to work together to share classes, to provide students with the easiest path to graduation. This is not an unusual model. The University of South Carolina, where I came from many years ago, developed the Palmetto College. You can take a class from any one of the universities in the USC system, and you get a degree from one university, but you can take any of those classes from any of those institutions, and it allows them to get through very easily. They have a couple thousand students in that program. So it's about not necessarily even adding a lot of classes it's about how we package what we currently do and package it in a way that fits the needs of that particular marketplace. We have great potential to do that, but we need to do a lot more. We've been working on setting up the system at this point. We need to go much more aggressively at doing this and doing this in a way that this is something that distinguishes us. That's an advantage we have. Not everybody has a system. Not everybody can collaborate across institutions the way that we can. But if we embrace that collaboration, we can, again, do some really good things. Now, before I finish, just a couple of things to keep in mind. Nothing I presented is new. All of this is strategies in one of our strategic plans, either at the system level or campus levels. We have talked about all of these. This is not, I know I've been in higher education for a long time. This is not a top-down thing. This is not Dan's idea. This is stuff that all of the faculty and groups have talked about and actually have embraced in some way, shape, or form. The problem is, I'm not sure everybody knows that they've embraced it. And so we need to basically do this type of presentation so that everybody understands, again, where we are, what's happening, where we're headed to, and we have much more widespread buy-in, and these are the changes we need to make. I remember when I was at Kent State, we had a president once who talked about in higher education, we're really good at no, and finding all the reasons we can't do that. So he declared the year of yes. That we were going to start with yes, and then kind of find out why we couldn't do it rather than starting with no. We need to be more yes. We need to be more focused on these are the things we're committed to doing. We're going to embrace those and go forward on those strategies. Because again, if we're going to outperform all of the trends, and let's keep in mind, everything is working against us, we're going to have to do all of these things. So that's my presentation. Happy to answer any questions.
Any questions?
I liked the presentation.
Oh, thank you.
Enjoyed it. No, comment on it.
Yeah.
Why the SIU Carbondale went down, Chancellor? Especially on these programs, what happened is when the budgets were low, there were cuts across the board on the programs. There were some programs or departments were very strong, psychology, anthropology, economics. And when the provost deans come, okay, we'll cut the positions. And that was one of the problems with this destination program.
Yeah.
People used to come. My classmate who graduated in '83 from Lexington, he is teaching at Northern, he retired now, I retired. And his daughter was coming to SIU for psychology 15 years back, 10 years. And then she went to Iowa. But he said, this program is very good. He called me. And that thing has disappeared from the campus.
Yeah, and one of the things that I think, and you heard it really from both chancellors, is being very selective about how we do positions going forward. And I think that's a different strategy than, you're right, I think for many years, again, when we had to do budget cuts, it was kind of almost across the board rather than being very strategic about it, which the strategic position alignment is very much kind of that mindset of, all right, we need to be very focused on that. I will say when I was a dean, I kind of did the same thing and reallocated positions to program areas that were growing from areas that were declining because that just made more sense of where we were headed. So
let me give one example. In economics, we had the only endowed chair on Carbondale campus. And it took me, not me, I was on the committee, 5 years to recruit the faculty member, endowed professor. The 100% salary is from the endowed one. And we hired that guy from Essex. Essex is ranked number 3 in the country in UK. And he's retiring next year. But he was in international trade. This field was not taught even at U of I. And we attracted students, graduate students. So something like that, even 4 or 5 programs, if they can flag up that they can compete with U of I, Chicago or Urbana, that can start the buildup.
Mr. President, this is an incredible presentation. And thanks for doing this. Talk a little bit about now how you're going to package this, who's going to be the spokesperson, how this is going to be communicated outwardly to the mass, and what timelines you're going to use to try and get this done.
yeah, so again, we're going to do, I mean, we have the white paper that really explains a lot of what's in here, which I shared with you all. We'll share that widely. So that's one way of communicating. We'll do presentations on the campuses. I'll be there with the chancellor, so we'll be there together to make sure this is not, again, a system thing telling the campuses it's something we all agree on. And then we're going to have to continue to follow up on it. Although again, some of these strategies are in our strategic plan and implementation groups. But I think what we're finding sometimes is they're getting pushback on what they're doing because there's not an understanding of why we're doing what we're doing. And so I think it's having that common understanding is critically important. And at least in my mind, at this point, we don't have that. So we need to have that going forward.
In your white paper, will you be communicating this out beyond the system community? And can you talk a little bit about that? Because,
yeah, no,
again, this is just such a, this is a very compelling presentation.
Yeah,
that you just just gave.
Yeah, and I've talked with a few different people about, I talked with the governor, deputy governor, others, some of the political figures, just about, happy to share the white paper with them now that it's done, happy to talk with them about it. Last time when the governor was on campus, I talked with him a little bit about it. But I do think there's audiences, particularly on the political side, that would be helpful. I think even some of our alumni groups and things like that, so they kind of understand that kind of how we got there and why we're doing some of the things we're doing. Because again, a lot of times when we have these conversations, it's always about, well, when I was there, it was this way, and we're not going back to that way because the world has changed.
Exactly.
Yeah, but we have a good way forward if we do the right things.
Trustee. You know, this message needs also the different groups that we have, the constituencies, you know, I'm just thinking our fundraising arm.
Mhm.
Those lay people that are involved in that need to hear this.
Yeah, happy to present it
Because
to
that's going to
anybody.
be a big.
That's where I'm going, Raj.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good group to present to as well. And again, because it helps them think about how their fundraising dollars may actually support, you know, some of these initiatives, you know, even and we've done this at a few places. I know Carbondale has some money for it, but those retention funds are so critically important. And that's one of those things that, again, we weren't usually giving scholarships to students after they were there, but it can make a huge difference. Yeah.
The Step Ahead was $2 million gift.
Right.
To help the Step Ahead.
Right. So they have done some of it already, but I think even reinforcing, it's always the whole thing. You not only want to convince someone to do something, you want to convince them that what they did was right. This actually reinforces some of the fundraising that we've already done. So.
Is this going to be presented to our faculty and staff, because they have to buy into this too?
Exactly. Yeah.
I mean, years ago, they didn't have to recruit, but now everybody has to buy into this.
Yeah. Well, and again, that's what I think one of the big points again to reiterate is that they can all play a different role. And when I talked about, again, that changes that we made in the program when I was program director, I was a second-year assistant professor. I was I'm sure the president didn't even know I existed, but I did something that made a big change. And I can point to other faculty and staff who've done things to other places I've been, as well as here, who've made a big difference. And so they're kind of moving forward and doing some of those things. If they know what it is that we would like them to do, some people will take the initiative and do some of those things, but they need to know that what they do, in contrast to my situation, will be a big thank you and they will contribute to the well-being for everybody. So it's, again, a different environment than it was then, but.
Yes, I had a question. It kind of is about both of two of your strategies, the second and the third one. I was a transfer student. I transferred to SIU when I was a junior, and my best friend was also a transfer student. And one of the things that we said was the hardest with transferring was finding an institution that would be willing to give us financial aid in the same way they would give a freshman. So with making a best use of financial aid dollars, is that going to be applied to transfer students also to kind of ease that part of transferring?
And no, that's really an excellent point. And I think something that, again, working with the group we're working with, but yeah, we've already been doing some of that. So for example, one of the things when we did the SIU commitment, which and one of the things I will say with financial aid dollars, one of the real advantages we have in Illinois is the MAP and AIM High programs. Those are very generous. They meet a lot of student needs. Again, coming from other states, I've never had a program for student need as generous as MAP is. So that's definitely important and really helpful. But we also established the SIU commitment, which was a way of kind of covering the gap after MAP and Pell. But one of the things that we did almost immediately after starting the commitment, it was focused on freshmen, was making it applicable to transfer students as well. So that was one example, but there's certainly more we can do, because you're absolutely right. I always say as a parent, the last thing I wanted to ever hear either of my kids say was, I want to transfer, because I knew all their financial aid was tied to where they started as freshmen.
Yeah, my dad was
so I would cry. Yeah, it's like that is just would have been a rough conversation for me. But again, it's because we focus so much on the freshmen and not the transfers. But when you look at our increasing student population, how many more new transfers you have this year?
For us, close to, let me get it wrong. Let me look it up and give it to you.
Yeah.
It's pretty significant.
Yeah, but it's not,
percentage.
I mean, it's less than we have as new freshmen, but it's not that much less than we have as new freshmen. I think yours was similar. So again, it's our transfer numbers are really critically important as well. We haven't placed our financial aid dollars at the same way.
Is there a
That's an
way
excellent point.
to bribe transfer students to encourage them?
That's just making it easier.
10.8% increase.
Yeah. So again, it's gotta be part of our strategy, but I think you're right in that the financial aid, we need to think about, are we again using all of those dollars as effectively as we could?
Because you're saying it would differentiate us from ISU and U of
Oh,
I.
yeah, most of them don't do it, yeah, at all.
Looking at like other, like when I was transferring, like there were some that was like halved. Like your scholarship was like instantly halved if you were a transfer student versus like coming in as a freshman. And I was like, well, I don't want to lose out on like $20,000 a year just
Right.
because I took an extra year to figure out I wanted to go there. you know?
It's
So-
the same philosophy as early decision,
Yeah.
which is, I think should probably go the way of the dodo and giving more flexibility to students because I don't think that it actually engenders high retention as much as people think it does for what I've looked at and transfer students as well. I actually transferred after just one semester at American University. And though I liked what they were doing there with student services, the reason why I came to SIU is because I had, luckily my mother went here, had the legacy sitting there for me. I had resources that I could tap into at SIUC and retain some scholarship funding. It was crucial.
Thank you. Anything else? Thank you, Dan, for this very needed and insightful presentation and like I said, hearing the message out to everybody and we'll get as many students as we can and thank you. It was a very, very good report. Okay, we're next going to close the meeting to go into executive session. I move that the meeting be to the public for the purpose of considering pending, probable, or imminent court proceedings against or on behalf of the board, appointment, employment, compensation, discipline, performance, or dismissal of specific employees, collective negotiating matters between the public body and its employees or representatives,